Do you know that feeling when everything finally falls into place? When every detail of the mosaic of life takes its place, forming the complete picture that you have been striving for so long? That's how I felt, standing in my brand new apartment after 6 long years of hard work, overcoming endless obstacles, rejections, doubts, exhausting overwork and an ascetic lifestyle, for the sake of a single goal: to finally call at least one place on earth my home, my personal refuge, where no one will tell me how to live and what to do, where I can be myself, without looking back at other people's expectations. My name is Julie, I'm 29, and this is my story. I remember the day I was promoted 2 years ago, as if it had happened only yesterday, down to the smallest detail: the smell of coffee in the office, the soft carpet under my feet, the concentrated expression on my boss's face when he called me in, and the icy pang of fear that went down my spine, because at that moment I was sure that they wanted to fire me, that everything that I had been building for years was crumbling in an instant. But instead, he handed me a contract with a significantly higher salary, and at that moment I realized that I was finally moving in the right direction, that the efforts had paid off, and that the future I had imagined in my wildest dreams was becoming real. From that day on, I lived like a monk, without frills, without spontaneous purchases, without expensive dinners, without idle entertainment, because every cent, every coin I earned was sent to my savings account, bringing me step by step closer to my dream. But I'll be honest, saving alone wouldn't be enough. A year ago, my grandmother died, my mother's mother, the only person who was always by my side, who saw me, heard me, took care of me when no one else was doing it. In her will, she left me $150,000, and this money, combined with what I had saved up over the years of austerity, allowed me to finally stop dreaming and start acting. I searched for an apartment for a long time, went through dozens of options, faced unreasonably high prices, incompetent agents, strange owners, but when I saw this 2-room apartment, I knew it was her. Not too big, not too small, without huge panoramic windows, but with a cozy balcony, which I already imagined going out with a cup of hot tea on autumn evenings, wrapped in a warm blanket. And the best part is no mortgage, no debts, complete freedom. The realtor asked twice if she understood correctly when I said that I was going to pay the entire amount at once, and then, when I signed the documents and received the keys, the very expression flashed on her face, for which it was worth enduring all this way. As soon as I left the agency, clutching the cold metal of the keys in my hand, I immediately took out my phone and took a million photos: the front door, the landing, my new kitchen, even the boxes that still had to be disassembled, and posted them on social media. My friends immediately went crazy with likes and comments, congratulations, words of support, vying to ask when the housewarming party would be, and for a moment it seemed to me that all this was really, really real, that I wasn't just watching a dream that was about to dissolve. But as soon as I relaxed for a second, the phone rang, and the name on the screen made me freeze, shrink inside, as if all the air had been sucked out of my body, leaving only emptiness and cold. Dad. Julie, his voice sounded hollow, dry as sandpaper, and that one word was enough to make all my joy, all the excitement of a new chapter in my life fade, recede somewhere into the background. I need you to come to lunch next Saturday. That call brought me back to the memories I was trying to forget, to bury them so that they would never come up again. After all, my childhood was far from as bright as I would like to remember. My mom died when I was 9. Cancer. The disease came unexpectedly, destroyed our family, took away my dearest and closest person, and then it got even worse. Dad wasn't alone for long. A year after my mother's death, he married Sharon, a woman who made it clear to me from the very first days that I was a stranger in this house, that my place was somewhere in the shadows, that I was just a reminder of the past that they all seemed to want to erase. A year later, they had a daughter, my stepsister, and then everything changed completely. With the arrival of the baby, life at home seemed to be divided into 2 camps: the family, Dad, Sharon, and their child, and me, a loner who had to exist nearby, obey new rules, follow established orders, which, oddly enough, concerned only me. Julie, be quiet. Julie, don't come late. Julie, why can't you be like everyone else? These were my everyday days. I couldn't invite friends. I couldn't turn on music. I couldn't count on attention, because it all belonged to another child. And the sister. She grew up spoiled. The excess of care made her moody, and my presence next to her always seemed unnecessary. She had the newest toys, clothes, gadgets, and I had the feeling that I had become a ghost in the house that had once been mine. Sometimes I even wondered if Dad remembered me. And if it wasn't for Grandma Margaret. Honestly, I'm not sure I could have gotten through these years without her. I started spending more and more time with my grandmother, because it was the only place where I felt safe, the only place where I was accepted for who I was, without reproaches, without hints, without endless comparisons with my stepsister. She lived just a 15-minute bike ride away, and I knew that her door would always be open for me, that in her house I wouldn't have to tiptoe around, holding my breath, afraid of disturbing someone's peace or causing irritation just by my presence. This house has become a real refuge for me, an island of tranquility and warmth that I missed so much. My cousins Jack, Emma, and little Tommy, my Aunt Sarah's children, also often visited my grandmother, and unlike Amy, my stepsister, they really treated me like a member of the family. We spent hours playing board games, laughing at the stupidest things, running movie marathons while sitting on the floor in front of the TV with bowls of popcorn, or just chatting while lying on a blanket in the yard. In those moments, I felt like I was part of something real, meaningful, something that couldn't be bought or faked. Meanwhile, the situation at my father's place was getting worse. Amy, my stepsister, has become a real nightmare. She hid my things as if playing some kind of cruel game of her own, forcing me to spend hours searching for missing textbooks or personal belongings, accidentally spilled drinks on my homework, forcing me to redo it from scratch, and even started spreading rumors about me at school, telling everyone that I was allegedly stealing money from my parents. Or that they want to kick me out of the house for bad behavior. But for some reason, I was always blamed. Julie, why are you upsetting your sister? Sharon said with cold reproach in her voice, and I had no choice but to silently lower my head and hold back the tears. Julie, you should be kinder. Amy's just a kid, my father echoed, not even trying to listen to my side. He always took her side, as if my voice had no meaning to him, as if I was not his daughter, but just a person who happened to be in this house and did not fit into his ideal world. The day I received my college acceptance letter was probably the happiest day of my life. Not because I was crazy about studying myself, although the partial scholarship I received was really amazing, but because it meant one thing: I could finally leave. College was 3 states away, far enough away to put it all behind me, to stop being invisible, to stop making excuses for just existing. Grandma helped me pay for what the scholarship didn't cover, and on the day I left, I felt neither sadness nor regret, just relief, because for the first time in many years, I didn't have to look back. College has become a breath of fresh air for me after many years underwater. I threw myself into my studies, built my life from scratch, called my grandmother at least twice a week, told her about my successes, about the people I met, about the future that finally seemed possible. The father rarely called, too busy with his real family, his perfect daughter. And when he did call, our conversations were short and perfunctory, as if he had no questions for me other than a formal, "How are you studying?" After graduation, I had to return to my home state, but not because I wanted to. It was just that the job offer from Thompson & Mills was too good to turn down. I assumed that until I found my own place, I could stay with my father, but Sharon quickly made it clear to me that I was no longer needed there. "Oh, we gave your room to Amy," she said, and her voice sounded so sweet and fake that I shuddered. "She needs extra space for her stuff, you understand, don't you?" My father didn't say a word. Not a single word in my defense. He didn't even look embarrassed, as if everything was exactly as it should be. But fortunately, I had a grandmother. She welcomed me with open arms, without even asking unnecessary questions, without demanding explanations, just opened the doors for me, as she always did. I stayed with her until I got a new job, and after a few months I had enough money to rent a small but cozy apartment. It wasn't much, but at least it was mine. And then, a year ago, my grandmother died. It was a sudden stroke in my sleep. She didn't suffer, she just left, and in an instant the world became empty and cold. She left her house to my cousins, and it made sense, because they lived closer and always helped her with the housework, but besides that, she left me $150,000, which she had saved all her life. For my granddaughter, who reminds me so much of her mother, the will said. Last year was quiet. My father and his perfect family hardly bothered me. They didn't even invite me to Christmas, but I wasn't surprised either. I spent it with Aunt Sarah and my cousins, and honestly, it was the best Christmas I've had in years. And now, sitting in the car, I was looking at the clock. 11:57. As I drove up to my father's house, a strange, unpleasant feeling grew inside me, as if I were moving towards something inevitable. The closer I got to their neighborhood, the harder it became to breathe, and I found myself gripping the steering wheel tighter, trying to stay in the present, not to let the memories overwhelm me. I'd rather arrive early than give Sharon another reason to complain about me. I rang the doorbell, counting the seconds until someone finally answered, listening to the muffled sounds from inside, as if trying to guess what was waiting for me on the other side. When the door opened, my father stood in front of me. His face was, as always, impenetrable, his features frozen in an expression of indifference that I remembered from childhood. "Come in," he said, stepping aside, without adding either "hello" or "how are you," without even trying to pretend joy at my arrival, as if this visit was something formal, something that just needs to be experienced and forgotten. I crossed the threshold, trying to stand up straight, not allowing myself to look insecure, but anxiety was already beginning to rise inside me, a cold, sticky premonition that this dinner would turn out to be even worse than I could have imagined. They were all waiting in the living room. Sharon settled into her favorite armchair, reclining in it like a queen on a throne, with an expression full of self-satisfaction and superiority that never disappeared from her face in my presence. Amy was sprawled out on the couch, idly scrolling through the tape on her phone, not even making an attempt to pretend to be interested or at least show basic politeness. Sharon didn't even consider it necessary to get up, barely nodding at me, as if my presence was no more significant than a draft that accidentally swept through the room. Amy, of course, didn't even spare me a glance. "Sit down," my father said, pointing to a lone chair across from them, and at that moment I realized that this was not just a family dinner. It's something else. I felt all the muscles in my body tense, and a wave of anxiety rose inside me as I slowly sank into this chair, as if I were sitting in front of judges who were ready to pronounce a verdict. The silence was heavy, strained, so thick that you could cut it with a knife. The father cleared his throat once, then twice, as if choosing his words, preparing for something that was about to happen. "Amy graduated from high school," he finally announced, as if it were urgent news that needed immediate discussion. "She went to a local college." I nodded, not sure what he was leading up to, not knowing if any congratulations were expected from me, because I wasn't even invited to the prom. "That's nice," I said carefully, realizing that they were waiting for some kind of reaction from me, and immediately felt the tension building. "She needs to live somewhere," my father continued, without taking his eyes off the point somewhere above my head, as if the conversation with me was something unpleasant, something that I wanted to end as soon as possible. "Somewhere near the campus." I waited without interrupting, without showing how anxiety was already beginning to rise inside me, how my fingers curled into a fist in my lap. "Your apartment would be perfect," he added after a short pause, and Sharon nodded like one of those toy dummies that shake their heads on the dashboard of a car. I blinked, not immediately realizing the meaning of his words, and then, slowly, like cold water poured down my neck, I understood. "I'm not looking for a roommate," I said slowly, not believing that this conversation was really happening, that they were really saying it out loud. My father shook his head and finally met my gaze. "You don't understand, Julie," he said with the same icy, detached firmness with which he spoke to me all my life when he explained that I didn't deserve something, that I didn't understand something. "We're not asking you to let Amy live with you. We're asking you to give her your apartment." I actually laughed. It was a short, sharp, incredulous laugh that instantly died when I saw their faces. They were serious. They were really serious. "Give her my apartment?" I repeated, trying to find the slightest hint of a joke in their expressions, that this was a ridiculous test, that they were just trying to prank me, but no, there wasn't the slightest glimmer of doubt on their faces. "The one I've been saving up for years? The one you bought with the inheritance from your grandmother?" "Yes," my father replied firmly, as if he were explaining something very simple, very obvious, as if I were a stupid child who couldn't understand basic things. "Amy needs her more than you do." I sat there, staring at them, wondering if I had somehow entered an alternate reality, a world where logic had ceased to exist, where all the rules by which I lived had suddenly been turned upside down. My apartment. The one I saved every penny for. The one I've been dreaming about for years. The one that has become my refuge, my freedom, my personal space, my reward for years of effort. They wanted me to just give it back. Amy. The same Amy who even now refused to look at me, who had made my life unbearable since childhood, who did not consider me part of the family. "She deserves it more than you do," Sharon said, and her voice was full of the same condescension I'd heard from her all my life. I knew that tone. I heard it when I was 9, 12, 15. After all, what have you done to deserve such a wonderful place? Living all alone in a 2-room apartment while my poor Amy has to think about a student dormitory? I jumped to my feet so abruptly that the chair rocked, almost tipping over. "Are you all completely crazy?" My voice sounded stronger than I expected, but I didn't care what they thought anymore. "I will not give up my apartment. Not now, not ever. I bought this place with my own money." His father's face darkened, his eyes narrowed, and he said slowly, with emphasis, "Your own money?" There was a tense silence in the room before he continued. "Your grandmother gave you $150,000. It's hardly your own money." Something snapped inside me. All these years I was silent, endured their insults, pretended that I didn't care, tried to be above it, become a big man, but the moment my father said those words, something broke in me. My grandmother. A woman who was everything to me, the only person who really loved me, who took care of me when I felt superfluous at home. I laughed, but there was not a drop of joy in that laugh, not a shadow of fun. It was the laugh of a man who had nothing more to lose. "You mean my mother's mother?" I asked, not hiding my sarcasm, feeling anger boil up inside me. "The woman who once asked me why you stopped calling her as soon as you married Sharon? The same grandmother you didn't bother to tell that I was left without a room because your new daughter needed extra space? The grandmother who never saw you at her door, unless you had to ask for something?" I looked at him intently, but my father just turned away, as if my words didn't matter, as if it didn't concern him. Amy, choosing the perfect moment, finally looked up from her phone. Her face instantly wrinkled, as it always did when she was preparing to play her victim role, when her crocodile tears were about to appear. "You're such a terrible sister," she wailed, pursing her lips. "You've always been so rude to me, you've never loved me." "Julie," my father's voice sounded harsh, clipped, with that steely note I'd heard so many times when he wanted to remind me where I belonged. "I am very disappointed in you. That's not how we raised you." Something inside me exploded. "Educated?" The words came out of me before I could stop myself. My voice was harsh, searing, but I didn't care. "You didn't raise me at all. You switched off the moment Mom died, and then, as if nothing had happened, Sharon moved in, and I ceased to exist for you. So don't you dare tell me how you raised me." I grabbed my purse and headed for the door, feeling my whole body tremble with anger, disgust, and repressed tears of resentment that I could no longer contain. Behind me, I could hear Amy's sobs, theatrical, artificial, as fake as everything she did. I could hear Sharon's comforting whisper. I could hear my father calling my name, but I didn't stop. I didn't even look back. I just left. I thought that would be the end of it. I really hoped. But the next morning, the phone rang again, and when I saw the name on the screen, I knew I was going to have another battle. "Julie, listen to me," my father began, not even waiting for my hello. "You're the older sister. You have to help Amy. That's what a family does." I almost laughed. Family? I said the word, savoring it, feeling the bitterness rise in my throat. Now you want to talk about family? Where was that family spirit of yours when Sharon kicked me out of my room? When did Amy make my life hell? When you didn't even invite me to Christmas? "This is different," he insisted, sounding annoyed, as if he was trying to talk to a stubborn child. "You're being unreasonable." "Am I being unreasonable?" I interrupted him, not allowing myself to relent, not allowing myself to be dragged back into this endless cycle of manipulation. "You're crazy if you think I'm giving up my apartment to someone who's been trying to hurt me all my life. Don't call me about this anymore." I hung up, thinking it was finally over. But that was just the beginning. After a few minutes, my phone started vibrating continuously with messages. "Sharon, you've always been jealous of Amy. Sharon, you're just as selfish and ungrateful as your mother. Sharon, after all we've done for you." I stared at the screen, feeling a strange calmness come over me. I wasn't angry. I wasn't upset. I just didn't feel anything for these people anymore. Dad kept calling throughout the day, but I didn't answer anymore. It didn't make sense. We walked in circles. He demanded that I give up my house. I refused. And for some reason, he thought that if he insisted long enough, my opinion would change. But it won't change. A week has passed, and I have made a decision not to let them overshadow my new life. I hosted a housewarming party, invited friends from work, old college buddies, and my cousins. My apartment was filled with people who really mattered to me. The sound of sincere laughter and conversation seemed like a cleansing ritual, washing away the toxicity of the past weekend, finally breaking the bonds that I had allowed them to put on me for so long. "Julie," Emma called from the kitchen. "We're running out of ice." I went to the freezer, but then I felt someone touch my arm. I turned around and saw Jack. His face was serious, which was extremely unusual for him. He was always the man who turned any tension into a joke, the family clown who could make even the darkest moments laugh. But he wasn't smiling now. "Hey, I need to show you something," he said softly, his voice restrained, almost cautious. I frowned. "Is something wrong?" He glanced around quickly, as if checking that no one could hear us, then leaned closer. "You might want to sit down before I show you this." I sat down on the edge of my new poof, feeling an uneasy premonition grow inside me, while Jack silently took the phone out of his pocket, his fingers slightly clenched on the case, as if he was still doubting whether it was worth showing me, whether it was worth sharing what was about to change my view of reality. But after a short, almost imperceptible sigh, he still handed me the screen, on which the image was already open. "I was at Lorenzo's last night with friends," he began carefully, watching my reaction carefully, as if waiting for me to realize what he already knew. "And look who I saw in the background." The first photo, as soon as I looked at it, seemed to squeeze the air in my lungs, and my heart stopped for a moment, because there, in a dimly lit restaurant, at a small table in the corner, sat Sharon, my stepmother, looking completely relaxed, happy, not at all worried about the possibility of being noticed. But most of all me, it wasn't even that struck her, but the fact that she wasn't alone. A man I'd never seen before was sitting too close, his hand casually resting on her waist, and then, as I scrolled further, I saw something that left me speechless. Their lips touched in a kiss that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. It wasn't just a fleeting gesture of affection, not a casual movement, but something much more. Something that cannot be confused with a friendly kiss or a habitual display of intimacy between colleagues. Then there was more. In one picture, Sharon was laughing, her eyes shining with sincere pleasure, and the hand of this man, who no longer seemed like a stranger to me, was lying on her chest, just below her collarbone, his fingers lightly touching her skin, as if this movement was habitual, honed, and had become part of their hidden lives. In the shot, he was feeding her dessert. Their fingers intertwined over the table, their bodies were tilted towards each other. They looked like lovers who had done this 1,000 times before, who did not think about how it looked from the outside, because for them it was the norm. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, that there was evidence of treason right in front of me, clear, obvious, treacherous, and at the same time, I felt that all this was just the tip of the iceberg, that there was something more behind it that I still had to find out, because that something inside me, some small voice that I couldn't resist, was saying that this wasn't just a casual affair on the side. "Jack," I gasped, feeling an uneasy realization rise inside me that I was on the verge of something much bigger than just exposing infidelity. "I know I shouldn't have taken the photos." He looked slightly guilty, but his gaze remained steady, full of determination. "But I knew you'd need to see it." I couldn't take my eyes off the screen, couldn't force myself to comprehend everything at once, because every new detail rolled in waves, turning this information into something intangible, into something that I wasn't ready to accept yet, but I knew I couldn't forget. When the party was over and my last guest had left, I was left alone in the darkness of my living room, sitting on the couch with my phone in my hands, which now seemed too heavy, too weighty, because its screen displayed information capable of destroying everything my father believed in, and even though I didn't feel for him, there was nothing but disappointment for him, and the realization grew inside me that I now had the power to ruin his life. I needed to find out who this man was. I needed to understand why I had the feeling that this was not just an affair, not a fleeting relationship, but something more, and it didn't take long, because Sharon was never careful, she didn't hide it. Robert Mitchell. That name was right there on her friends list. I just had to scroll down a bit, and when I clicked on his profile, the world in front of me started to collapse, because that name, that face, that biography, it all came together in one complete, creepy puzzle that took my breath away. Robert Mitchell worked for the Riverside Insurance Company. 20 years old. At the same company where Sharon worked. In the same company where she got a job right after she married my father, and, apparently, their relationship lasted much longer than just a job. I started flipping through his photos, starting with the oldest ones, and the further I went into the past, the clearer it became that he was always there. Corporate picnics, office parties, holiday celebrations. She was at many of them, sometimes just in the background, sometimes partially out of the frame, but I recognized her, I saw it. 20 years of photographs. 20 years of hidden meetings, glances, smiles, casual touches that weren't so random. And suddenly one of the photos made me freeze, because it showed a woman in a red dress sitting on a park bench next to Robert. Her face was turned away from the camera, but I knew who it was. The caption under the photo, "Perfect Sunday afternoon." I was shaking because I couldn't make a mistake. Her hair. Her posture. Her favorite red dress, which still hangs in her closet. It was Sharon. The photo was taken 3 years after she married my father. I felt uneasy, and a chill ran down my spine, because I didn't want to understand what it was all leading to, but I knew it was impossible to avoid it. I opened a new tab, started searching for more recent photos of Robert, and when his face appeared on the screen, it was like a bomb exploded inside me. Those eyes. That nose. That mouth that always curled at the corners, even when he wasn't smiling. I slowly opened the photo of Amy, the one I had recently saved to my phone, and held it up to the screen. The resemblance was undeniable. How did I not notice this before? Amy was never like my father. But she was an exact copy of Robert Mitchell. And now, holding the phone in my hands, realizing that this truth was like a red-hot coal burning a hole in my mind. I realized that there was no turning back. For 2 days, I walked with the weight of what I had discovered, with this red-hot coal burning inside me, turning into a real fire with every minute. Every time I looked at the photos, when I replayed what I had learned over and over in my head, I felt sick from realizing that for 20 years of deception, 2 people whom my father considered his family had built their lives on lies, and he remained blind to all this, immersed in his illusion. An ideal marriage, sincerely believing that he lives with a woman who loves him, that he is raising a daughter who is his flesh and blood. When his number popped up on my phone screen again, I almost ignored the call because I wasn't sure if I could talk to him, knowing that he had no idea that he had been betrayed in the most brutal way, but something made me pick up the phone anyway, maybe instinct, maybe pure curiosity, or, most likely, a cold premonition that this conversation would lead to the inevitable. Julie, his voice was stern, cold, and he sounded the way he always sounded when he wanted me to know who was in charge, reminding me that he was a father and I was just a daughter. We need to have a serious conversation. Come to the house right now. I thought about just blurting out the whole truth to him, just telling him that his wife had been cheating on him for 20 years, that his daughter wasn't his daughter, but intuition stopped me, an inner voice whispered that it was too early, that I needed to prepare, that I still had time to do everything like that. As it should be. I'll be there in 20 minutes, I replied calmly. When I arrived, only my father and Sharon were waiting in the living room this time. The atmosphere in the room was tense, almost staged, as if they had prepared something in advance, some kind of final ultimatum, after which, in their opinion, would have to break down. Sit down, Julie, my father commanded, and I obeyed, for the last time playing the role of the obedient daughter that I had never been, that he had never allowed me to be. He didn't even waste time on pleasantries, didn't ask how I was, didn't try to pretend that we weren't enemies here. Your behavior is disappointing, he began, pacing in front of the fireplace, his voice harsh, almost insulting. This selfishness, this refusal to help your sister, your complete inability to understand what it means to be part of a family, all this must stop, and it will stop right now. I watched as Sharon nodded in agreement, as triumph flashed in her eyes, and I literally twisted inside from the audacity with which this woman, who betrayed my father, cheated on him for decades, had the courage to sit here and demand that I give my apartment to her illegitimate daughter. At that moment, I made a decision. My father kept talking, his tone getting tougher, and with every second he raised his voice more and more, convinced that his words could influence me, that he had power over me, but I already knew exactly how this conversation would end. Either you give your apartment to Amy, or I completely cut you out of my will. His voice sounded like a lash. He thought it would drive me into a corner, that it would make me give up, that his inheritance was so important to me that I would sacrifice everything for a piece of money that I would never have. Worried. Sharon smiled a little, it seemed venomous, as if she was sure that this conversation was going according to their plan, that they were about to get their way, that I, like an obedient lamb, would agree to their terms. I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. I forced my face to express shock and grief, allowed my eyes to widen, as if these words really shocked me, as if I really faced a difficult choice, because I had to play my role. I need to think about it, I whispered, watching as the smile on Sharon's face widened, as triumph flashed in her eyes, because she believed that I was beginning to hesitate, that I was broken. Good girl, my father's voice softened slightly, and he even tried to smile, as if he really thought he was just giving me time to realize what was really important. I resisted the urge to laugh in his face. Can I use the bathroom? I asked quietly, hunching my shoulders, making myself small and insecure, playing the image of a broken daughter who could be pressured. My father waved his hand dismissively, as if to say that he didn't care where I went, as long as I thought right. But instead of going to the bathroom, I slipped noiselessly into Amy's room, my old room, which was now completely redone for her, all in pink tones, as immaculate as her whole life. On the dressing table was her comb, with long dark strands stuck on the teeth, the same as Robert Mitchell's hair. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, adrenaline coursing through my body. As my fingers carefully pulled out a small plastic bag from my pocket, I knew I needed proof. I knew I had to do it, and so, without giving myself time to think, I carefully collected a few hairs, sealing them in the package. But I didn't stop there. I crept into my father's bedroom, where nothing had changed for years, his comb lying on the dresser, next to the wedding photo, in which he and Sharon looked so happy, so naive, so alien to the reality that was now unfolding before me. The irony of it all didn't escape me when I gathered up his hair, too, knowing that in just a few weeks, the truth they were trying to hide would come out. That same evening, I started researching labs that perform DNA tests, the kind that do official paternity tests, the kind that can be used in court if I suddenly need to prove it to the whole world. It wasn't cheap. Almost $2,000 for urgent processing, but it was worth every penny. The next morning, I entered the lab with 2 carefully labeled packages, feeling a storm of emotions still raging inside me, but knowing that I would not stop. The specialist explained the process, made me fill out the forms, assured me that the results would be ready in a few weeks, and when I left the building, I knew only one thing: this day would be the beginning of the end for Sharon, Amy, and possibly for my father himself. The results of the DNA test came in an ordinary white envelope, which seemed so insignificant, so impersonal, but it was he who now held the truth that could change everything. My fingers trembled as I opened it, although deep down I already knew what would be written there. I knew that this document would only confirm my suspicions, make them indisputable, turn them from suspicions into facts that could not be ignored. I ran my eyes over the official text, over the strict lines of the clinical language, which left no room for doubt. The alleged father is excluded as the biological father of the child being tested. Probability of paternity, 0%. That's it. The final blow. And at that very moment, as if according to the script, my phone rang. The name on the screen made me involuntarily squeeze the envelope in my hands. Sharon. "We're tired of waiting," she barked, not even bothering to say hello. Her voice was harsh, irritated, and full of impatience, as if she were talking not to an adult woman, but to a moody child who needed to be restrained. "Your father and I want your decision on the apartment. You have a few days. If you're undecided, you can say goodbye to your inheritance." I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, trying not to betray any emotion in my voice, no sarcasm, no triumph that was already rising in me, knowing that I was not losing anything anymore. "Actually, I've been thinking about everything," I replied evenly, calmly, pausing before adding, "I'm coming to dinner this Saturday. We can discuss it there." I heard a short pause on the phone, and I could almost imagine the corners of Sharon's lips twitching up in a smug smile, as if she had already decided that she had won, that she had cornered me. "Very good," she said dryly, and hung up. I looked at the white envelope still in my lap. "No, Sharon. You're the one who's backed yourself into a corner." On Saturday evening, holding a purse with an envelope with the results safely stored inside, I drove back to their house, but this time I didn't feel any anxiety, fear, or the usual nervousness that used to squeeze my throat every time I visited. This time, I wasn't afraid of losing my family, because I realized that I had lost it a long time ago. They were waiting in the living room, and the picture I saw made me stifle a grin. Sharon literally glowed with triumph. Her posture was perfectly straight, and there was a smug expression on her face, as if she had already declared herself the winner and was only waiting for the moment when I humbly accepted my defeat. Amy, sprawled on the couch, casually looked at her manicure. A faint smile touched her lips, as if she knew that everything was decided, that just a little more and my apartment would be in her hands. My father stood by the fireplace with his arms crossed over his chest, trying to look stern and principled, but I could see that inside he was pleased that he had already calmed down, deciding that this issue was no longer discussed. As soon as I entered, Amy stretched out on the couch and said with deliberate laziness, "It took you long enough to make the right decision." My father stepped forward and put his hand on my shoulder, and the movement was almost affectionate, almost kindred, but there was a sense of rigidity, submission, and the years of control that had passed when he believed he had the right to control my life. "I'm glad you've changed your mind, Julie," he said in a flat, confident voice, filled with that condescending tone he always used when he thought he was doing the right thing. "This is the essence of a family, to help each other." I felt my lips twitch in a smile, but I quickly suppressed it because it wasn't the time yet. "I haven't changed my mind," I said calmly, without unnecessary emotions, looking straight into my father's eyes, seeing how his face first froze and then tensed. "I will not give up my apartment. Not now, not ever." For a moment there was dead silence in the room, then his father's face turned red with anger, and his voice became as hard as steel. "That's all. You're excluded from the will." I saw the corners of Sharon's lips turn up in a victorious grin, and Amy chuckled with satisfaction, but it only lasted a second, because then my father added what I came here for. "Amy gets everything." He paused, as if savoring the effect this was going to have on me, then continued in an icy tone full of finality. "My real daughter. Someone who truly understands family loyalty." And that was all I needed to hear. I laughed. Loudly. Loudly. So sincere that there was a tense silence in the room, and all three of them stared at me like I was crazy. I shook my head, pulled an envelope out of my purse, holding it between my fingers, and spoke without hiding my satisfaction. "Your real daughter. This is interesting, Dad, because I have something you need to see." I handed him the envelope. He frowned, but took it, pulling out the papers, his eyes quickly running over the text as he began to read aloud. His voice at first remained firm, confident, but then everything changed. The color drained from his face, his hands trembled slightly, his gaze darted between the lines, as if he refused to believe what he had written, but even he could not deny the facts. Sharon screamed as if she'd been punched in the stomach. That's a lie." She screamed, her face contorted with panic, her voice sounding almost hysterical. "She forged these documents. She's trying to turn you against me. Against us." I didn't even blink, calmly pulled my phone out of my purse, scrolled through the photos Jack had taken, and, lifting the screen so that everyone could see, said coldly, "Then maybe you can explain it to me." There was a deathly silence in the room. On the screen, Sharon was locked in an intimate embrace with Robert Mitchell, their lips touching, his hand resting on her waist, their fingers intertwined on the table. The father did not move. Amy sat up abruptly, her face ashen. And Sharon. Sharon was speechless. The time stamp on the photo clearly showed that the picture had been taken last week, and when my father saw it, when he finally realized that there was indisputable evidence in front of him that it couldn't have been a mistake, a coincidence, or malice, I saw something break in him. Sharon collapsed on the sofa, her mask of superiority, so carefully built over the years, cracked in front of her eyes, crumbling to dust, her face turned pale, and her eyes, full of horror, darted around the room, as if she was trying to find a way out, but there were no more exits. "David, please." Her voice was weak, trembling, and it no longer had the confidence or the assumed arrogance that she had showered on me all my life. "I can explain." "Explain?" My father roared. His voice was like a thunderclap, which made me shudder. For the first time in so many years he was really angry at her, and not at me. "Explain what? How long did it last?" There was a dead silence in which it seemed you could hear the beating of our hearts, and when Sharon finally opened her mouth, her voice was barely audible, as if the very truth was unbearable for her. 20 years. She whispered, tears began to roll down her cheeks, but this time they did not cause sympathy, because they were the tears of a caught liar, not remorse. The father froze. I saw his world crumble in real time, as 20 years of his life, his marriage, his love were shattered by the cruel truth about the betrayal that lasted almost half of his life, and although I did not have much affection for him, although I still held a grudge in my heart for all the years of neglect, I still felt sorry, because no one deserves to find out about betrayal in this way. Sharon covered her face with her hands, sobbing, but I knew those tears weren't about him. They were about her, that she'd lost, that she couldn't control the situation anymore, that the truth had come out. He's my colleague at Riverside Insurance. She swallowed, her gaze blank, as if she realized the magnitude of what she'd done, but it was too late. Amy. She looked at her daughter, and I noticed how Amy shrank, as if trying to disappear, as if she realized that her life was about to change once and for all. Amy, she's Robert's daughter. The silence that followed this confession was deafening. I didn't stay to watch my father digest this information, as his whole world collapsed. I just got up, grabbed my purse and left, leaving them alone with their payback. The next week passed in a blur. I went to work, returned home, tried to make sense of everything that had happened, to digest the avalanche of events that suddenly burst into my life, and that's probably why I wasn't surprised when I heard the gossip. I found out through friends that Sharon and Amy had moved out, that my father had hired the best divorce lawyer, and that the scandal had spread like wildfire through their social circle, destroying the illusion of the ideal family they had supported for so long in the eyes of others. And then, a week later, when his name reappeared on my phone, I hesitated. A part of me didn't want to answer, didn't want to go back to it, but something in me, maybe curiosity, maybe remnants of affection, or maybe hope, still made me pick up the phone. "Can we meet?" His voice was rough and tired, and it lacked the same authoritarianism and confidence with which he used to speak to me all his life. "Where?" "Carson's Cafe." When I entered, he was sitting at a corner table, staring into his cup of coffee, which had apparently cooled down a long time ago, and I couldn't help but notice how much he had changed. He looked like he had aged 10 years in 1 week, unshaven, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes lost. The wedding ring had disappeared from his finger. "I file for divorce," he said without any preliminaries. His voice was dull, without emotion, as if he were saying it into the void. "Sharon and Amy are gone. I told them to get out of my house. I also stopped paying for Amy's college. Why should I pay for someone else's child?" I didn't answer, just slowly stirred my latte, waiting, because I knew that wasn't all he wanted to say. "Julie." His voice broke, he swallowed, looked at me with an expression I'd never seen on his face in my entire life. "I was a terrible father." "Yes," I nodded calmly. "You were like that. All these years. I preferred Amy over you. I let Sharon treat you like a stranger in your own home. I didn't protect you. I didn't support you." He sighed, his gaze full of pain. "I failed you in every way possible." "You did it." I looked straight into his eyes, not looking away. "And you would never have realized it if you hadn't found out about Amy. If she were your biological daughter, you would continue to treat me like a second-class person. You would take my apartment away from me and give it to her without hesitation." He flinched, but didn't argue. "Please," his voice was almost a whisper, and he slowly reached across the table. "Please give me a chance to fix this. Let me try to be the father you deserved from the very beginning." I jerked my hand away before he could touch it. "That was 3 months ago. We meet sometimes, over coffee, over lunch. We talk cautiously, we discuss safe topics. He tries to catch up by telling me stories about my mother that I've never heard, asking about my work, about my life, trying to become a part of what he himself pushed away 20 years ago. But full forgiveness? I'm not there yet. Maybe I never will. 20 years of rejection and neglect have left scars that won't heal overnight, if ever. As for Sharon and Amy, I sometimes hear gossip, but it doesn't matter to me anymore. They moved in with Robert Mitchell, started living the life they've been secretly planning all along, but honestly, I don't care. This is a chapter of my life that is now closed.